So yeah, good evening guys. So in last class we have seen how state works and we did the basic stuffs in HTML using React. So we completed all the basic frameworks, uh, basic skeleton of this site. So we did all the CSS stuff and I completed all the CSS based things in this site and I just fixed those bugs. So the bugs which were in the last session was there was a typo in here. I just left out a closing parenthesis there. That's why the done button is not working fine in previous session. And the next thing I changed is there is a typo in here too. So that's why those things are not aligned perfectly and they are showing us some bugs. So I fixed it. So the next thing we are going to do in this session is we are going to implement the functionality. So for now the appearance is good and we designed and we refined things in this site. So the next thing is we have to implement the functionality. So we already did some works in the previous session. So opening the overlay and closing it, it is also not completely finished. So states are something that has scope within the component or within the component in which it is defined. So you can access a state only within the component in which it is defined. So it has some kind of local scope stuff. So you can't access this state inside another component which I used here. So you can't use the task state inside the completed card. So that is different component and the index.tsx is a different component. So the task is only accessible inside this component, not on other components. So to overcome this, we have a topic called higher order components, higher order functions and higher order components. So what higher order components and higher order function means, a function that simply gets a function as an argument or returns a function as a value, then it becomes an higher order function. In component, a component which gets a component as a prop or returns a component is called an higher order component. So we are going to use this technique to access the states throughout different components in this project. So yeah, so we have to implement functionality on clicking these two buttons, right? So for now the state is rendered only based on this button. So when I click add task, it just shows the overlay and you can't interact with this. Nothing works here. So we have to like create on click listeners for these two buttons and then we have to update the main task state according to these values that you're going to give here. So we have first, let's implement the cancel button. So once you click cancel, the overlay has to go. The logic behind the overlay is simple. So we initialized a state for that. If the state is true, then the overlay should be displayed on the screen, or else it should not be displayed. So as I said, states are completely local. So you can't access the state inside this overlay, right? Inside this overlay component, right? So you can't access it once the button is actually here. The cancel button is actually here. You can't access a state and like let's say set overlay dispatch function here. So 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 to do this, we are going to use a simple trick. First, let's get a prop for this. Let's pass on let's pass, we have to pass the function, right? So let's pass a function to this component. A handle close. So I'm going to pass a function on handle. So we are passing this function to this component. It shows error because we didn't define anything about this function we are getting in here in the component. So we have to go there. So we are getting type what I define handle close and then I am getting a which is of type mouse event handler, right? So once we got that, we have to use that in this button component. So I have already used a on click listener on button. So we have to pass this exact function here. Before that, we have to get this prop and restructure it. Handle close. So we are getting it. Okay, it's done. So let's save and check if it's working or not. Refresh the page. Yeah, it displays and it goes. So it's working perfectly. We have just passed this function, this full function to the component here, the overlay component, and then we are changing the state and then we are rendering the page according to it. So this is how you change states of the state which you are not able to access in different components. So this is how you should do. The next thing we have to achieve is, so once you open the overlay, you have to type something, you have to enter some data here, and then you are going to add this data to the main task list, right? So I have created a task state in the previous session, so we are going to add that whole object into into this list. So yeah, let's add that functionality to here. First, it's not giving me date and time, so we have to set some type in there. Let's navigate to our overlay, and the input type is, let's change it to date so that it accepts date, and save it. And you can see, you can clearly enter date and time. So yeah, and the value written by this input is like it will be a string. So there is no special data type for date and time. Ultimately, it will return a string. So yeah, you will be seeing that in a minute. So next thing we have to do is, we are already handling the data which we are entering in here in this input fields. So we just want to send that to the state which is defined in this index page. So let's uh, create a function which is used to set a new task, which is used to which is used to set a new task to this task state. So let's name it as task to task list. So this is going to be an arrow function, and then we are going to, let's have a temporary variable, so which is of type tasks, and then we are going to assign some let's get a argument from there. So let's say data, which is of type array of string, which should be in the type of array of string. Yeah, okay, in id, and let's return data of 0. Time, and for 1, and then we are going to set this value to the task state, right? So this is called a spread operator. So if you put 3 dots, what it does is it just copies the previous value of the task and then assigns it, and then adds a value which you mention it after that. So what this line means is keep the previous values of task and then append the value temp job to it. So this is how that works. The next thing we have to do is we have to, once the task is added to the task list, we have to close the overlay, right? For that we have to change the overlay state. So for that we are going to change it. Set overlay. We are going to negotiate that state. Yeah, and let's return something. So since it is going to be a mouse event handler, I'm saying that the compiler that it is going to be a mouse event handler. So this means the function returns a mouse event handler. So you have to be careful in this step. If you miss this step, it will show an error because you can't assign a simple function to a mouse event handler. It will throw error. So let's save this and let's go to our overlay page, and we have to get another function, right? Add task, uh, and the function should be, and the function is going to receive an array which is of type string, and then it going to return a value which is of type mouse event handler. So yeah, next we have to destructure it in here too, add task, and then we have to call the function in here. So on click, we have to pass 3 values, right? Since the function is getting an array of 3 values, so what I'm doing is add task, and inside this I'm passing the 3 state values. Set task title and task date. What's the state value here? Date and task time. So yeah, we are passing these 3 values as an array as an argument to this function. So yeah, save this. Once we click this add task button here, create button here, then it gets a value of this input field and this input field and this input field, and it makes it as an array like this, and then it passes it to a function called add task. So we have get this add task function from the component index.tsx. It goes here then, and then we are processing the data. We are storing it in a temporary variable, temporary object which is of type task. So and then we are going to concatenate that temporary object to the task, and then we are we are like changing the task value. So since we are changing the task value, the DOM gets rendered. So there is an error here. Add task is declared here. Okay, we didn't pass anything to overlay, so that's the error. So add task, we have to pass the function, so function name add task to task list. Okay, let's save this and let's check if it works. So let's go to the React developer tools, components. You can see we have 3 states. We have to get the entry in here. So the first state is task, right? We have to get the entry in here. So let's try this. I'm going to add a task, call boss, and then let's add some date and some random time here, 8:40 something. And then let's create. So you can see, one sec. Shit. As you can see, as I added, it just added a new entry to that state. So let's try adding in another value here. Go out and let's have some time. Okay, let's create. So it's working perfectly. So we are like, if you click on it, the values in here, the properties, the values, everything will be listed. So as you can see, it basically returns a string. So the date and the time input returns a string value here. So yeah, we are getting the values perfectly. Now what we have to do is we have to populate the values, right? We are like, now we are populating static values in here. So for that, I am going to use the same technique as I populated values in navbar items. So yeah, in progress card, the list we are going to use is task. So I am going to map task dot map, which is going to give me an JSX element, which is going to give me an React element. That is in progress code. Paste it in here. So yeah, ID of this would be item.id, and the task would be task title, and the time would be time, and the date is item.date. So yeah, let's save this and check it. So as you can see, it's just completely rendered. Since we have like two values in here, it just rendered to these two cards in here. So let's try adding a new task. Let's create it. So yeah, it added a new task here perfectly, and it works perfectly. So how I return the code is, initially the task is I initialized to 0, right? So there is nothing in here. So I initialized an empty task here. If you want, you can add some task here, so that when you refresh and you start the web app for the first time, it shows the task which is initialized. So for now I have started like with nothing, and then once we start adding using add task, it should show here. So that's how I designed this. So the next thing we have to do is we have to achieve the same functionality we have did in progress to complete it too. So for that, I'm going to use the same function map. The only difference is I'm going to map a different state variable called as completed task. So let's complete a task. Complete a task dot map, and then I'm going to return a single component or an HTML element. So the ID should be same. We are like repeating the same steps here too. Task title, time. Last thing is date. As we initialized an empty string in completed task 2, this will be deleted from here. So yeah, it works perfectly fine. Let's add a date. Yeah, now we have to like add, once I click this done button, we have to push this card to complete it. So for that, I'm going to create a function called, let's have this function in here, const move to completed, going to be an arrow function, and it's so yeah. For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that ID, right? So for moving a task to this, you have to get some reference, right? Which task you are going to move to that completed. So for that purpose, I'm just getting ID. So, and then what I'm doing is I'm getting the index. I'll explain you in a minute what it does. Let's finish coding, and then let's and explain. For now, this is no needed. You have to return this. This should be a mouse event handler, so the return type is mouse event handler. Yeah, this function is, you have to pass it in here in card. So for that, we have to go to here, and then we have to add a say, to completed, and then it should be a function which receives a argument which is of type string, and then it returns a mouse event handler. So we are going to pass this in here on click, so that should return this function, right? So I forgot to destructure it. Now we can use it in here, and we are going to use the ID. So we are getting the ID before from here, so we are passing the ID as a prop, and then we are destructuring it and passing it to this function. So what this function does is, so once the user clicked on this the done button, it calls the move to completed function and passes the ID of the particular task. So of the particular task on the instance which he clicked. So, and then one sec, let's add that function here to completed, and then I'm going to pass move to completed function here. So yeah, once he clicked that button, the ID is passed there, and then what it does is it finds the index of that particular list element in this task list, and then it just returns the object uh, which is in returns the exact object that is in the list. So basically we are just finding that particular task in the list. So I think we are good to go here. Let's save it in everywhere, and let's try to run. Okay, we just get the index and we didn't do any set task, right? So we have to set that value to the completed task list. So let's set completed task, and then I'm going to keep all the values, previous values of the state, and then I'm going to add value from the task which is of index this value. So I'm just getting the index of the particular task which I clicked, and then I'm finding it, and then I'm just passing it to the completed task. So I'm setting it like this. So yeah, let's semicolon there, and let's save this, and let's check if this actually works or not. Let's go to components. So this is the completed task state, right? For now we have a single entry value here. So once I click done, it just moved to the completed. So let's say hard task, and let's add a new task here, another task. So 10:30, and I just created a new task. Let's try to move that one too. So it just moved here. So it works completely fine. So if I click it in here multiple times, it's going to add the tasks like multiple times inside incompleted task. So this will create data redundancy in your web app. So to like remove this bug, what we have to do is once the user clicks this done button, the card has to remove itself from this area, right? It has to disappear from this area. It has to be deleted from this area. After that only the user can't click it another time, and it won't get added multiple times inside completed list. So for that, let's define a function const remove task. So for that also I'm going to get an id as a string, and then which is obviously returns a mouse event handler. Okay. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the task from this task object, right? For that, I'm going to use a function called filter. So what filter does is filter actually filters item, the item that you pass from the list completely. It's not equal to id. So what it does is if the item id is equal to the id which I passed, then it just if it is like if the condition becomes false, then it's just omits the item, and then it just adds the remaining items to the list. So it returns a list of task object which we created. You will see that in a moment. So let's call this function here. Once we set the completed task here, and then we have to remove it, right? Let's remove it. We are calling that handle remove task. The error here is okay. So we don't want to send the whole task object. We just want that id, right? So let's pass that id only. Hopefully the error resolved. So if it works, then it should like remove the task completely from the in progress. Let's check. Time is 9:56. It's great. Okay, yeah, it's working perfectly. And let's set some time created. Yes, cool. So let's check the states as well. sorry, it's components index page. So you can see there is no states involved in here. The entries that we added is like moved to the incompleted state, the second state we created, right? The task is here, so it's working perfectly. The next thing I want to do is the final thing. So let's say we have a task called ABC and some time. If the user clicks on this X button, it should remove this card from the list. So for that, I have already defined the functionality. In here we have the function called remove task. We have to call it in the right instance. So we have to pass this function, since this close button is inside the component called in progress card, right? So we can't access these state variable inside that component. So what we are going to do is we are going to pass this remove task as a function inside as a prop to this component. So let's say we have a variable called remove task and we are passing this whole function there. Okay, and we have to define it here too. Its name is remove task. So that gets an ID as a value and its type is string, and then obviously it returns a mouse event handler. So we have to call it when that exact X is clicked. So I'm going to, that X is like I'm imported it from the font awesome. So this is the exact HTML element which is the text. So let's say on click we have to pass that function. So I forgot to destructure it. That's why it's not showing suggestions. Remove task, and the final thing we have to pass the ID. So yeah, save all those things and let's refresh and let's check how it works today, and let's set some time and then let's create it. Let me create some more tasks. We created 3 tasks. Let me add check the scrolling functionality there. So let me add more tasks here. So yeah, it's working perfectly fine. Once I click the X button, it just leaves the list. So it's updated in a second, in a fraction of a second. So if you note it clearly, let's check if it's moves to completed. Yeah, it just moved to completed. It's working perfectly all right. So let's check the state's value. If it's, yeah, there is no value inside that main task state and the values are moved to the completed task. So this is how you have to use React to develop a web app. So this is how easy it is. If you like fully utilize the potential of React, you can do wonders, and like you can efficiently build many web apps using this. I have only covered a basic hook called useState. There are many hooks. There are like 3 to 4 hooks. The second one is it is called use reducer, which is like which is the same, similar to this hook, but it has some extra functionality and it's like uh, a successor to use state, like kind of. So it does more it has more power compared to use state. So and yeah, and other hooks use memo and use callback. So these are the hooks in React, and you will not be using these hooks much, but the use reducer is much important. You will be using it in cart kind of applications. So it's like an advanced kind of state management stuff. So please make sure you read use reducer, or if you want, please say that I will send you notes for that use reducer. Or yeah, the next hook is like you can have custom hooks there in React, so you can call it whenever you want. The syntax for creating custom hooks is you have like you have to create the file as .tx. The file should be as extension.ts, and the file name should start with use. So this is how a custom hook should look like. So you can use this custom hook whenever you want in a code. So this is how React works. If you have any doubt in here, so we have completed the web app which we are developing for past 3 weeks, right? So we have completed. So if you have any doubts, please ask. If you want any reference materials or kind of stuff, you can also ask that. I will glad to provide that to you. I'll just push this code in GitHub, and I'll post the link in the chat box so that you can refer to it. Okay, let's. Okay, it's updated. So yeah, I'm making this as a public repository, so you can access it whenever you want. I'm, I'm posting this link in here. Chat box. So please make sure you refer that. So if you have any doubts about states till now, what I have taught to you, if you have any doubts, please ask. And anyone, please kindly check that GitHub link is working or not. Open it and check it. Okay, okay, bro. Okay, anybody other doubts? So the next session will be like Chaitanya will be my friend. Chaitanya will be coming and he will be teaching backend stuff. So I have covered, like I have taken the whole 6 sessions very in a slow phase. So I have like make sure you understand the basic things, and I hope I have not rushed anything. So yeah, try to like do some projects, simple projects. We did a Facebook front end clone in second session, right? Third session, right? So try to make that thing, make that Facebook clone in React. So yeah, try to do some simple projects. You will learn a lot from that. If you have any doubts, please, you can also contact me. I'll just put my mail ID here. So mail me if you have any doubts. So yeah. யாருக்குமே டவுட் இல்லையாடா?
ப்ரோ
சொல்லுங்க 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 சொல்லுங்க.
ப்ரோ இப்போ இது ரெஸ்பான்சிவா மாத்துறதுக்கு we can use bootstrapல.
We have to if you are using bootstrap na, there is no need to define that whole CSS, right? அந்த நம்ம டிஃபைன் பண்ண எந்த சிஎஸ்எம்ஸுமே தேவையில்லை. யூ ஹாவ் டு கம்ப்ளீட்லி யூஸ் பூட்ஸ்ட்ராப் கிளாஸஸ்.
ஓகே ப்ரோ. இப்போ அந்த கிளாஸஸ் நீங்க டிக்ளேர் பண்ணி அந்த கிளாஸ் நேம்ல போட்ட மாதிரி தேவையில்லாம டைரக்டா பூட்ஸ்ட்ராப் எலிமெண்ட்ஸ்
தேவையில்லாம பண்ண தேவையில்ல. ஸோ வீ கேன் லைக் நான் இது வந்து லைக் ஃப்ரம் த ஸ்க்ராட்ச்ல இருந்து சில கன்சியூமர்ஸ் கேட்பாங்க. ஸோ இஃப் யூ ஆர் ஒர்க்கிங் இன் ஆர்கனைசேஷன்னா இட் தே வில் பி ப்ரொவைடிங் யுவர் யூஐ. ஸோ அது வந்து கம்ப்ளீட்டா யூனிக்கா இருக்கும். So you can get you can like completely change the bootstrap components to like which your wish. So அந்த மாதிரி bootstrapல வந்து சில limitations இருக்கு. So அதனால தான் I have taught you to like do the manual CSS first. So manual CSSல நீங்க strong ஆயிட்டீங்கனாலே bootstrapலாம் it's like a simple thing.
Yeah, okay bro.
So and இன்னொரு tip என்னன்னா bootstrap வந்து will like increase your page load. So it will be downloading many bootstrap stuffs, right? So your bundle size will be increased. So and so yeah, for that try to like use bootstrap for simple applications like portfolio applications. For that and all use bootstrap. For bigger applications like you can manually write CSS, and then the point here is you have to like write the components which are reusable. So you are breaking the UI into components, and then you have to write it in a way in which you could reuse it in many places. So அந்த மாதிரி you have to write. அப்பனா வந்து your code will be considerably less.
Yeah, okay bro. Thank you.
Yeah, and responsive இப்போ இருக்க இந்த CSS code we can be making it responsive. அதுக்கு வந்து what we have to do is I'm telling you that too. So you have to add a media query. And you have to pass a function inside this media query. You have to like, this is called breakpoints. There is things called breakpoints. One sec, I'll just check the breakpoint here. What the exact breakpoint for? One sec.